Hey everybody, I thought I would chat with you guys and gals today a little bit about something that's ironic, and it's a false statement that people make because they haven't researched it. And they bring this up every time we discuss nutrition research because for some reason people are extremely resistant to looking at large-scale meta-analysis, large-scale studies when it comes to nutrition. They're always looking for bias, mainly because people love eating butter and stuff, I guess, so they want to force feed certain types of junk and they want to justify it. And it's usually fringe diet people, and they'll bring up, well, at one time science said that smoking was healthy. That's not actually true. Those are people who clearly didn't research it. There was never, to my knowledge, in the modern world, any scientific consensus or studies saying that smoking was in fact healthy. What happened around 1930, there were studies looking into it, because up until then they had no evidence one way or another if it was healthy or not. So researchers started looking into it, and there were studies coming out saying, hey, this might not be good for you. Now people are saying, but what about the 50s? Yeah, well, that's what we're going to get to. That was marketing. It was not actual research. But that's the power of marketing when people are willing to spend enormous sums of money to convince the public of things in advertising. So what had happened in the 1930s, around 1930, there were studies coming out saying, hey, smoking might actually be kind of bad for you. We need to collect more data, but we're seeing a trend here. So what happened? Cigarette companies had meetings about this. This is all documented in their notes and stuff. They said, hey, we can't have this. What can we do to convince the public that smoking is safe? So they started trying to both fund research as well as start a marketing campaign. And one of the things that they did for like 20 years to counter this emerging science was doctors love cigarettes. And so what they would do, they started having all sorts of commercials and ads and things run on television, radio, publications, pictures showing doctors smoking or doctors endorsing cigarettes, okay? The problem is that they weren't even usually real doctors. It was usually just actors. So they were hiring actors to do the commercials. They were hiring actors to do these things who were not even medical doctors. So again, doesn't matter because they weren't having problems with it. It was just advertising, right? You can have an actor get up and say something, right? You can get an actor get up and say, oh, I endorse smoking, and then put a name, Dr. So-and-so, and a little thing under it. And it's healthy and it's great for you, okay? And that's exactly what they did. It was marketing. Now, keep in mind, there were some doctors who weren't against smoking, but as many people have pointed out, and doctors have pointed out, medical doctors are not immune to addiction. And just like other people, when you have an addiction to something, it is difficult for you to personally admit that it may be harmful. This has been noted among doctors, even with the smoking back then, right? Those doctors who were saying that were oftentimes addicted to cigarettes, just like other people. Well, that's going to create bias in your opinions, okay? It's going to create enormous bias in your opinions. So while this was happening, the scientific community from 1930 on was compiling data showing, hey, trends in lung cancer. Okay? Lung cancer was a big one. They're seeing trends in higher blood pressures, cardiovasculars, all these problems from smoking. Okay, this is what the science was saying, and yet an industry that was making a fortune selling cigarettes because it had become trendy, it had become a part of pop culture in the US and everything, still is in Europe to some extent. You saw all of this trending, and so therefore they were making enormous sums of money. So therefore they spent all this money on marketing and even tried to get some of their own bias studies and things done, okay? So what this tells you is that their marketing was so successful that to this day, there are people who still think that doctors were at some large scale, or scientists and researchers were endorsing smoking as healthy. They weren't. That is not what happened. Again, and if people did basic research, they would see that that's not what happened. It was quite the opposite. It was companies spending money to try to create a counter argument so they could keep selling their products. All right. So don't we see the same thing with nutrition? Just like when I discussed that, hey, large amounts of red meat or saturated fat, problematic. The data for this is overwhelming. Enormous amounts of studies showing the impact on LDL. We know that LDL causes atherosclerosis. That is well documented at this point. That's not even really debated. It's been pretty well shown. We know that saturated fat impacts LDL. That is one of the largest contributors to elevating LDL. We know that saturated fat negatively impacts insulin sensitivity. It causes insulin resistance in the liver. This has been shown in the lab in actual human test subjects. Okay? Shows there's studies, large-scale studies showing people who eat the most red meat have a 62% higher rate of diabetes than other people in the other groups. Right? The data is all there. So this is an example. Yet beef and pork industries have what? They have funded their own studies to counter this stuff. Right? There was one meta-analysis done a while back, and people have cited that to me, that we found no correlation at all between red meat intake and diabetes. Except that you have tons of studies showing an enormous correlation, and we have lab studies showing the actual mechanisms by which it causes it. Well, who funded that meta-analysis? Beef and pork interests did. That's who funded it. So that's the same thing. So this is a perfect example of where you see a small bit of biased science being funded by industry. And I'm not telling you in moderation some steak is going to hurt you, by the way. I'm not saying that. Okay? So we need to be clear here. Still a quantitative issue on the saturated fat. Obviously, leaner steak is going to have less impact, so on and so forth. But this is a perfect example. Like, this is literally the same thing. This is industry doing the same thing the smoking industry did back then. The science is not the problem. Marketing, advertising, that's the problem here. Because the data is very clear. Just like back then, the data was emerging showing smoking was a problem. Well, we know today that large amounts of saturated fat in your diet are a problem. The data is overwhelming for this, contributing to multiple diseases through multiple pathways. What you are seeing is industry and propaganda trying to counter that because they're losing money. Right? It's the same thing. So when people are talking about all the science back then, so you can't believe anything then that science says is healthy, but that's a fallacy. It was marketing and advertising saying it, not the scientific research. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.